This is the video that I have had so many requests for. How to make a simple loaf of sourdough bread. If you are brand new to this world of sourdough and wild yeast and you're feeling totally overwhelmed with all the options, this one is for you. Okay, before we get started, the most important part to having sourdough bread that actually works and doesn't turn into a doorstop is to have sourdough starter in the right stage of activeness. This little starter is bubbly and super happy. See all the bubbles there? When I fed it this morning, it was about that big and it's doubled in size and it is active and ready to roll. Sourdough takes a lot longer to rise than your typical commercial yeast bread, so you just kind of have to build that into your routine. Now what I like to do is I start my sourdough projects as I am cleaning up the kitchen and putting the kids to bed. Well, not while I'm putting the kids to bed, you know what I mean, somewhere in that vicinity. So I will get the dough or that first step started, I cover it, I leave it overnight, and then in the next morning I can shape it for its second rise. And that's exactly what I'm gonna do with this loaf. All right, this is super easy, here we go. Take your bowl, put your half cup of sourdough starter into the bowl, and then pour that water right in with it. Give it a little bit of a mix to bring everything together. And then you can add in your 3 cups of flour. After the flour goes in, go ahead and put that salt on top. And now you're just going to get it mixed together with your fork or spoon as best as you can. Now this is technically kind of a no-knead bread. We're not going to be putting it on the counter and working it with our hands like you saw in my other simple bread video. This is sloppy and wet and that's how we want it. But for now, go ahead and cover your bowl with a towel and set it aside for about 20 minutes or so. Okay, now all I have left is just to refresh my sourdough starter with some brand new flour and water. Someone online asked me the other day how often I change out my sourdough starter jar, which you may have also been wondering, judging by the crustiness, and let's just say not often enough, but it's okay. Okay, so after the dough has had a chance to sit for 20 or 30 minutes in the bowl, we're gonna give it a quick fold. And this is just gonna bring the dough together and put it in a nice little ball, and then we're just gonna leave it alone for the night. I just like to grab a side of the dough and press it over into the middle, and you'll see the tension in the dough start to develop as you do this. I'm just trying to get it a little bit tighter, a little more together. And once I'm at this point, I'm just gonna shape it into a nice little ball and put it back in its bowl for the night. So you want to put your bowl in a warm spot. So if your house is warm enough, you can just leave it in your kitchen, on your kitchen counter, but our house can get a little cool at night. So I'm gonna go put this over by our wood stove. And now I'm gonna go make some tea and call it a night because it has been a long day on the homestead. Good morning. So our sourdough did really good over the night. I'm super happy with the progress. Check this out. It's about double in size, and now we just need to turn it on the counter and do a little bit of shaping before we let it go for its second rise. Okay, so when I do this, I'm gonna be really careful not to deflate the dough. With our traditional yeast breads, we might punch it down. We're not doing any punching with our sourdough. I'm just gonna detach it from the sides of the bowl without losing the air bubbles, or at least as much as possible. But what we're gonna do now is just get this dough to come into a nice round ball. I just kind of like to bring it over on each side into a nice little package and then shape it. And then what I wanna do now is leave it on my countertop to rest for another 10 to 15 minutes. And if you worry it's gonna stick, you can put a little flour down, but I just need it to relax a little bit more before we put it in our proofing basket. Let's talk about proofing baskets really quickly. I got these baskets off of Amazon and they were pretty inexpensive. Now the purpose of these baskets is to hold the shape of the dough as it rises so it doesn't just smush out on the counter, and then we'll transfer from the baskets into the Dutch oven when we're ready to bake. All right, so now it's been sitting here for 10 minutes or so, and I'm just gonna tighten it up one more time before I put it in my proofing basket. So how I like to do this, I find a spot on the counter that's not floury, so I can get a little grip, and then I just like to pull it towards me a little bit, which is just gonna shape the dough just a little bit tighter. All right, and now it's ready for the second rise. I'm gonna put a little bit more fresh flour on it, just to make sure we don't have stickage. And then I'm gonna take my dough and put it seam side up in the basket. And then just cover it with a towel and let it rise again. Now keep in mind with any of these rising steps, you get to adjust that according to your situation and your starter. So if it needs more time, there's nothing wrong with that. We have a patient in our mudroom today. The temperature dropped last night. It went from 60 degrees to very, very cold this morning, and he was born right in the middle of it. When Christian found him this morning, he was super wet and super chilled, so we don't do it very often, but we brought him up to the mudroom. If we'd left him outside much longer, he wouldn't have made it. Dozer has been with him all morning. He was cuddling with him, checking him out, licking him. He's very worried. And Dozer. It's been a little while, and I'm really happy with how my dough looks on its second rise. It's about doubled in size. It's got some air bubbles. It looks light and fluffy, so we're ready to bake. Okay, so before we get ready to put this in the Dutch oven, I want to put a little cornmeal on the bottom of the pan just to help prevent the crust on the bottom of the loaf from getting a little bit too black, a little bit too crunchy. And so cornmeal will just help elevate it a little bit and let the air circulate a little bit better. Now the problem is I don't have any cornmeal at the moment, so I'm gonna do my quick little trick instead, is I just grind up some regular old popcorn kernels. You need to do it in a grain mill or a high-powered blender like this Blendtec, but it works like a charm. We have our cornmeal in our bottom of our Dutch oven. I just use a 5-quart. You can use probably a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. But I really love the Dutch oven to make this loaf because it mimics a brick oven just a little bit. You could also use a cookie sheet or a stoneware baking tray if that's all you have. Take our risen loaf and just to get a square of parchment paper, and we're gonna carefully put the parchment over the basket and then slowly flip it upside down. Makes me a little bit nervous, okay? And then if it doesn't flop out right away, just give it a little wiggle. Hopefully you floured it enough. Looky there. I take a super sharp knife. Serrated is great if that's what you have. And we're gonna do some slashes. Now some people get really fancy and do designs. We're just keeping it basic today, so I'm just gonna do 3 slashes. One other little trick you can use to help keep the bottom of your loaf from scorching is to just take a piece of foil and stick it in the bottom of your oven, just on that rack underneath where your pot will go. And the idea is it'll help just deflect some of that heat along with the cornmeal. It should just make our crust a little bit more even. Now this is a crusty loaf, so we want a thick, crunchy crust, but we don't want it black and like the type of crust that would break your teeth. So it's preheated to 450. I'm going to put the lid on my Dutch oven and we're gonna stick it in the oven for 20 minutes. When my timer goes off, we'll just take this lid off and let it continue baking for 30 minutes. Now if you wanted to, you could bake it a little bit longer and get a little bit darker, but I do think it's done. And look at the bottom, it's not black. So this was a success in my book. Oh, I almost forgot. The little calf made a full recovery and he ended up going back to his mama and the herd after just one night in our mudroom.